Okay, I've sewed my side seams, and while I pressed my side seams open, I went ahead and pressed up my hem. Kill two birds with one stone. But let's get back to the waistband. So up here for the waist, you can see the hidden zipper. You can't see it, right? Or at least not hardly. Here is, I chose this narrow waistband. And if you want to just cut your own, it's 2 inches wide. 1/2 of an inch for each side of the waistband and 1/2 of an inch for each seam allowance. Very, very simple. So what I start by doing is lining up with right sides together my waistband onto the edge here. I usually allow my waistline to stick out just a little bit to make sure that my stitches are pretty even, and leave a little bit of an overhang. Go back to the machine, you're just using a regular straight stitch, and with a 1/2 inch seam allowance, or whatever seam allowance you want to use, but I'm using 1/2 of an inch. Back stitch at the front, and a couple things you might notice, I'm not using interfacing in this. And I know that waistbands often call for that. I find when I'm using a narrow waistband, I don't need it, sometimes. But I use this waistband just as a binding. So this fabric has a little bit of stretch. I want to be careful that I don't stretch too much, but I'm just going to allow that under fabric to ease, just a little bit. So just go ahead and stitch. And if you watch my hand placement, I'm just going to keep moving this skirt around. Hopefully it's flat enough that you can see. And then just use this, move your hand just a little bit, and stitch that far. By doing that, you're making sure you don't gather any layers underneath, and you also make sure that you're not stretching the waistband too much as it's going in. Move that around. When you get to the side seam, depending on if you pressed your seam allowances open or to the side, mine are pressed open, if you can see that, just make sure that they're still open so when you stitch, you don't accidentally flip one to the other side. And I'll go ahead and go all the way around, just so you can see how I finish the edges. And when you get to the end, just go ahead and stitch past with a little back stitch. Just grab a pair of scissors here and snip that off. All right, so now what I have is the waistband partly attached. I'm just going to press this flat, and then you're going to press this to go over the edge, if you follow, and then tuck this under and press. You're going to do that all the way around. And then when I get to the end, I'm going to flip these back. So let me just go press real quick, and I'll show you what this looks like. All right, so I'm just going to do one portion of the waistband so I can move on to the hem. But notice how I just tucked this under. So what I'm doing on the back side is folding it over the raw edge, tucking it under so it covers up that stitch line. I purposely used a bright pink fabric, or bright pink thread so you could see what I'm doing. All right, and at the end. So I'm just going to do one side here, just so you can see this. Both sides are the same. Here's the edge. Now when I stitch this, I'm going to stitch out just a little bit past the zipper. So flip this along the fold, flip this back, just like this. And I'm going to take it to the machine and stitch just outside of that zipper. You'll want to do a couple back stitches here because this is a part that when you have a hook and eye attached to it or a button, it's going to take a little bit of wear and tear, especially if we gain a little bit of weight. It takes more stretch. Now all I did is like trim that off, and I'm flipping it to the right side like this. And that's the edge. Okay, now the other thing I'm just going to start about right here. You can see this is folded in the back. It's really a good idea to top stitch from the front side of the garment. And you have two options. You can stitch right along the waistband or stitch right in the ditch. I'll do one of each so you can see what they look like. In the ditch is right along the edge here of the waistband. It's right on the edge of that seam. So I'll do just a little bit like that. I'll have to remember to rip this out before I wear the skirt because you'll see that. Or you can stitch it right on the edge of the waistband. Making sure to just keep that underneath tucked. All right, so I think you get the idea of the waistband. So let me just show you both real quick before I move on to the hem. There's stitching in the ditch, and there's stitching on the edge. Totally your preference. I usually end up stitching on the edge of the waistband, but I just like that look. So let's move on to the hem. I've already serged this, I've already pressed it up. The next thing, I could just take this and do a blind hem, or I could do a top stitching, but here's one that you probably haven't seen me do before. This is just a little bit of seam finish, and it covers up the serged edge. It's just kind of a nice look. This doesn't fray. And what I do is I stitch this on where this goes right into the middle of that serging. There we go. And I probably would not use pink in this, although you have seen some of my crazy linings, maybe I would. But you'd probably pick a color that matches because you don't want it to show through. So I'm just going to do a little section here so you can see this. There's that. Now I'm going to go press that because that looks a little bit icky. So I'm going to do part with this and part regular so you have an idea in case you can't find this stuff. So let's go back over here to the iron. And notice because this hem is curved a little bit. In fact, the hem on this skirt is a little bit longer in the back than the front. I purposely designed it that way. I like the look. So when I'm going to hem this, notice how I have to stretch just a little bit to make sure that this is even. You just want to make sure that you don't stretch too much while you're pulling this hem, or you end up with little puckers all along here. All right, so the next thing I'm going to do is a blind hem. So look in your manual and look up a blind hem. My stitch looks like this, and the foot looks similar to this, where on the bottom there's grooves. The big trick about the blind hem, though, is how you flip your fabric. So let's just get this foot down. So first I'll start with a piece that doesn't have the lace. Take your fabric and flip it back, just like this. That's all it is, one flip. And this is always the part that I know gets everybody. How do I know that? Because I answer the emails. And when I say flip, that's the flip. So you have the inside of your fabric facing up, and your bottom of your hem is just sticking out just a little bit. Now, I haven't tested this yet, so I'm just going to stitch, and I'll show you if it's good or bad. But you'd want to test it, and you can adjust the width of the needle further, wider, or narrower. So the idea is to just have a little snip on the right side of the fabric. So let's see what we have. This is a true test because I haven't tested it. So this is what it looks like on the wrong side, and this is what it looks like here. And then when you flip your hem open, see those little notches there? Now ideally, you would want these to be a little bit smaller. So I would just adjust my width just a little bit, but if you were using yellow thread, it wouldn't stand out as much as this, but you just want it to pick just a little bit. So what about with this lace edge? See how nicely that looks? Well, you want to do the exact same thing, the same flip it back, but this time the edge of your thread is going to touch the lace or this satin ribbon and then hit. So it's exactly the same thing except you're hitting the ribbon instead. The ribbon really comes in handy if you're using a real thick fabric, like a wool or something like that, and you just don't want all that bulk. All right, so let's just stitch a little bit of this one. And see what this looks like. Okay, so you can see how it's just picking the edge of the lace here. See what it looks like on this side? Not bad. And then from the right side, let's see what we have. Looks like I missed a couple right here, but see there how it just picks that side. So that is what a blind hem is, where you can just hardly see it, and you would do that all the way around. Now, one more thing I want to show you is if your fabric has a lot of stretch, like this one, sometimes the blind hem doesn't look as good. If you do the blind hem and your hem is sticking out or you got little puckers, which you'll know what I'm talking about, it'll stick just like this. The last thing that I would suggest is just going to your machine and seeing if you have a triple stitch. And a triple stitch it's quite often called the stretch stitch. Stretch stitch. Say that fast 5 times. And I'll just show you that one real quick. It moves the needle to the left position usually, and it just goes back and forth. See how it just goes back? You've seen me use this on knits all the time. Well, this is great for top stitching skirts. So I'm just gonna go a little ways here. Looks really good with that crazy colored thread, doesn't it? So this looks really nice on here. It's a sporty look, but it still looks nice. It finishes your hem. It'll stretch a little bit. So if you have a little tighter fitting skirt, it looks great. So those are 3 hem options that you have. So basically, that's all you need to do to sew this skirt together. And the last thing that I want to mention is when your waistband is finished, you're all finished, you have 2 options at the waistband, and that would be to leave this side a little bit longer and then put a hook and eye, or finish this side to be exactly the same as this one and then put a hook and eye. Let me show you a couple more things. I talked about the longer zipper. Well, let's go back over here to the pink skirt. For those of you that wanted to use a hidden zipper but you couldn't find the right length, which happens a lot, this one is still the same thing, but let me just flip this skirt to the right side here and show you how long this is. This happens a lot. In fact, one time I did forget to cut it off and it was hanging out. Not so pretty. So on here, you see my markings that I was mentioning that sometimes you can do to make sure these stitches end at the same spot. And also, this zipper's different than a standard. I'm just gonna snip this off. Give yourself a little bit of room. And that's it, because your zipper top is never gonna go this far. And then I usually take satin ribbon or lace or something and wrap it around the bottom side, so you can either just flip this over and do a couple stitches. You just don't want that rough part hitting your skin. So that's how you do that part, and that's about it on these. I want to show you a couple more things on the skirts that I have. So this waistband here, this is a stretch fabric, similar to what I just showed you. So my stitching is a triple stitch right along this edge, and that waistband stretches when I wear it. I love that. It's similar to cutting it on the bias, which we'll see in a later episode this season. This black skirt, you can definitely see how the hem is a little bit longer on this one because of the plaid. And this, again, has the blind hem at the bottom, similar to what we did. And notice, you can't see a thing on the right side. And this skirt here, if you want to get real creative, is that yellow fabric that you just saw. And this is a whole separate fabric. This is a linen see-through. And I took this and I quilted the entire thing. So those are different options. Whatever fabric you have, it's going to hang differently for the rest of the season now that you've learned how to sew a simple skirt. We're going to pattern hack it. We're going to add pockets, a center seam, a maxi skirt. I've got a whole bunch of fun skirts to share with you.